there were two issues with that data. Firstly, finding it, getting access to it, being able to use it took an enormous amount of time. And secondly, the computing power to actually trawl through that data and actually come up with analysis also took a huge amount of time and energy.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today it is an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce you all to this particular session where we are going to know more about the cloud computing. My name is Harsh and I'm going to moderate this session for all of you, wherein I'm going to introduce you to all about event and perhaps the person who is going to interact and address all of us. First of all, I request you to kindly acknowledge and welcome the presence of our esteemed guest, Madam Tara Garson, who is here with us. I would like to request all the persons, those who are watching this session on YouTube, to kindly upload in the comment section and welcome the presence of our guest. Madam Tara Garson is a head customer solution management at AWS Singapore. She is passionate about technology, innovation, and transformation. She is a senior executive in the tech sector with experience in cloud, on-prem, sales, services, and customer success, and had worked in Asia Pacific region for many years. Madam Tara leads the customer solution management business for AWS and is a member of APJ leadership team. And I believe her profile has so many things, so many glories, which I won't be able to explain in next few minutes. But I'm pretty sure during this conversation, we are going to learn a lot from her. So moving to the topic of today's session, which we have chosen, is how data became one of the most important resources of the 21st century. Ma'am, it's a kind of request to you. Kindly please explain our viewers how actually it happened.
Yeah, so let's just go back a little bit in history. When we think about how data used to be used, it basically was very, very manual. And when you do things very manually, two things happen. Firstly, very slow. So you can't get very much information from very many places at one time, which means you have partial sort of in a box subsets of data. The second thing that happens when you do things very manually is that you make mistakes. And that also impacts on the accuracy of the data. So the main thing, obviously starting with the internet, going back quite a while now, but the main thing that's happened over time is the availability of data and the speed of data. And those two things make an enormous difference to all kinds of things. They have huge ramifications. So if you think, to take a current example, if you think about the situation around COVID-19, we have had vaccines developed in under 12 months. Now that, for those of us who are not in the medical industry, that may not seem like such an amazing thing. But when you develop a vaccine, there's enormous amounts of data that you need access to in order to go through the process of trial and error and working out how to develop a vaccine. Previously, there were two issues with that data. Firstly, finding it, getting access to it, being able to use it took an enormous amount of time. And secondly, the computing power to actually trawl through that data and actually come up with analysis also took a huge amount of time and energy. So it's not just the data, it's the speed and the power of computing as well. And those three things combined have really transformed how businesses and everyone can interact.
All right, ma'am. I think it was really a very insightful answer from your side, and I think the viewers, those who are watching this session, they must learn something from it. Ma'am, I have a next question. The question is actually how big data, if you will explain, it will be really great. How big data is empowering AI and machine learning at scale?
Yeah, so the way big data is a really interesting topic. So the way it interacts with machine learning and then sort of upper level to AI, basically, if you're going to use data to inform your decision making, you need lots of data, you need it quickly, you need to know that it's accurate, and you need to be able to analyze it, because there's a difference between information and insight. And so big data basically is not just the availability of huge amounts of data, it's actually the availability of huge amounts of data that's meaningful, that then enables you to take some kind of action. So it's sort of a process that you follow through. When you think about machine learning, basically what you're doing is taking decisions that are complex and difficult for human brains to calculate, and you're automating them. It's as simple as that. So if you were to think about a simple problem that a human can solve, you look in your inbox every morning and you see emails that you delete, and then you see emails that you read. This is spam, this is not spam. That's quite easy when you have your own inbox. I mean, for most of us, relatively easy. Once you get to scale, so if you're a business that is contacting hundreds of thousands of customers, you actually can't do that. Or if you're a business that has a lot of complexity in, this might be spam, but it might not. It might be a news article that I can use. It might be some information that's relevant, but I'm not quite sure. They're the kind of problems that machine learning allows, because it automates that process of analysis. And as I said, in order to do that, you need huge quantities of data. Because when you step up from the level of machine learning to AI, you basically start to learn the algorithms, the sort of computing power that sits behind machine learning starts to become much more effective, and it starts to learn what decisions, it's like our intuition, our human intuition, what decisions have led to the right answer, what decisions have led to the wrong answer. And it's called referential learning. It's basically making the decisions of the past and the result sort of narrow more and more to a more accurate result. Now, when you get to AI, it sounds a little bit sci-fi sometimes. You know, sometimes it can be seen as the stuff that you see in the movies. It's, you know, about facial recognition, and it engenders a lot of nervousness. But essentially what AI is the human interface that takes big data and machine learning and allows us to interact with it in a more personal way. And again, to give you an example, there's a really interesting company actually in Singapore in the banking sector, and they basically personalize your interactions with your bank using platforms that you use every day. So rather than having to go to your bank, you can actually log on to WhatsApp or Instagram or Snapchat, and you can actually talk to your banker, and you can get answers in a natural language format to the questions that you want. Now, for me, that's perfect, because there's nothing more annoying than having to go to a website, type in a question, figure out what the answer is, try and navigate my way through the, you know, somewhat complex processes that banks sometimes have. If I can simply open WhatsApp and type, I need to know my balance, and I get an answer back straight away, you know, with a friendly voice that says, hey, Tara, nice to see you. I hope you're having a great day. Your balance is this. That's a really nice way to interact. And that's the kind of thing that AI is now enabling.
All right, ma'am. I think you have covered all the aspects related to it, and I think you have very beautifully explained why actually how big data is empowering AI and machine learning at a scale. Ma'am, my next question to you is that, as we all know that data is a lifeblood of AI, the AI system needs to learn from the data in order to be able to fulfill its function. But as data is collected from multiple sources, so how to ensure its quality and ensure that actually it is malware free or not?
Yeah, ensuring the quality of data it's a really interesting one, because it's a very grey area. There's basically two types of data. There's structured data, which comes from things like devices, you know, phones that are sending back data, or machines that are sending back data on how efficiently they're working. And then there's unstructured data, which is more the natural language stuff. It's the sentiment on Snapchat, or, you know, what Twitter is saying. And that unstructured data, it's not so much that it's accurate or not accurate, it's more the question is it usable or is it not usable? And if it's usable, what am I actually going to do with it? So, you know, I think there are many companies who are experts in assessing data and analyzing it, and, you know, streaming data into these various different forms. The way typically companies are doing this now is through building a data lake or a lake house. And that basically puts all the data in one place. So you start to end up with a more complete data set, which is actually probably more important. Because if you go back to statistics that you might have learned at school or university, there's a normal distribution of these things. So the more data you have, the more accurate it will naturally be, because it sort of flows along the normal distribution curve. The the sort of really relevant thing is, what am I going to do with the data I get? What action does it lead to? Because unless it actually tells you something about how to interact with your customers more effectively, or which services are being sold, or which products you need more of, it's not really very useful. And that's one of the challenges at the moment with data. There is so much data. There's an explosion of data because there are now so many devices that are pinging and sending back information that it's becoming quite challenging to manage the volume of data and separate what do I need to know, what's useful for me, and what's kind of noise. And the other part of that is that it becomes very expensive. So if you imagine, let's say a TV broadcaster that's broadcasting sporting events, most of the time their data use might be sitting sort of, at some sort of flat level. When they have a major sporting event, a cricket match or, Olympics, something like that, suddenly the use of data spikes. Now, in order to meet that demand, if you're holding your data in an on-premise server, you have to have this level of capacity all the time to meet these spikes. That's super expensive and not very efficient, which is where cloud computing comes in, because it enables you to take that sort of unused resource and give that to a cloud computing company, which then allows you to scale up and scale down very flexibly as your business needs to. And it actually auto scales, so you don't have to manually figure out how much capacity do I need. The systems will do it themselves for you.
Insightful, ma'am. Again, it was really very insightful answer from your side. And ma'am, I have a question. Actually, I want to know your thoughts. What do you believe? How can AI and ML transform the way we read and understand the data?
How can AI and ML help us understand data? Well, look, the first thing is, we've talked about the volume of data that's now available. Trawling through all of that for a human brain is really time consuming. It just takes an enormous amount of time. And then filtering that into what's useful and not useful also takes a huge amount of time. So partly it's just about efficiency. It's like any machine. As you start to do things with a machine, it becomes more efficient. I think one of the conversations around this that I find quite interesting is the fear, which is, sometimes founded, sometimes unfounded, that the job market will be significantly impacted by big data and machine learning and AI. And interestingly, a report was done about a year ago that highlighted there's actually going to be a significant amount of net job creation through these new technologies. The shift will be what type of jobs are being created. So those jobs that were previously manual, really time consuming, not very efficient for human brains to do, those jobs will start to be automated. Things like data analysis, data collection, auditing, that kind of thing. The things that human brains are really good at is assessing the meaning of data. That's what humans do really, really well, actually much better than computers at this point, happily. There's something we still do better. So those kind of jobs will lead to a whole lot of net job creation in lots of different industries. And you start to see this now in the advertising industry, for example. The advertising industry are increasingly using access to big data to come up with super, super creative campaigns that leverage data on consumers and behavior to deliver the kinds of things that everybody wants.
All right, ma'am. Again, you have very beautifully explained how actually it works. And I think today it's a kind of privilege that today we got a chance to hear all these things from you. Ma'am, I have a question from one of my subscribers. Actually, the question is, what do you believe, what are the future challenges for cloud computing?
That's an interesting question. What are the future challenges for cloud computing? I think one of the things that is, we're seeing this as a massive trend now is the huge amounts of data that are being created, and cloud computing is the power behind that. So keeping up with that trend is something that, all of the major cloud computing players, AWS included, are really focused on. The other thing I would say, which is increasingly becoming important, is the sustainability of this whole industry and this whole process. And so you would have seen announcements from AWS and others about the use of sustainable energy to manage the volume of data and the storage and the computing power that sits behind data, which is, it's something that's really important, because as the data grows and the need to store and compute and send data grows, we need to be thinking about how we do that in the most efficient way. So I'd say, I don't know if they're the biggest challenges, but I'd say they're two of the challenges.
Indeed, ma'am. Again, you have explained. I think the viewers who are watching this session, of course, they are going to take it a lot from this session. And not only I think, but I do strongly believe also. Ma'am, actually, I have a question again from one of my subscriber. What are the best possible ways to protect the data?
Best possible ways to protect data. Look, honestly, there is layers and layers and layers of security, and for AWS, security is always our number one priority. I think there's a real need to use the automated systems that exist through the companies that are experts in this space to protect data, because it's a bit like the war on drugs in sport. As you try and protect data, then breaches occur, and breaches can be very expensive and very damaging to individuals as well as companies. So, the first thing I would say is sometimes there's a feeling that storing your data on your own premise is really secure. In actual fact, probably the paradigm needs to shift a little bit, and it needs to be more a case of, do I as a business have core competence in storing data or not? And usually, unless you're a cloud computing player or a hardware provider, the answer is going to be no. It's not my core competence. You can do it, but it's probably not what you're best at. So the best thing to do is actually to outsource that to the experts and use the experts, the kind of services that AWS offers, is to make sure we do proactive reviews with our customers on how they're protecting their data. And we have a shared responsibility model which says we look after the infrastructure and the customer looks after the applications, which keeps the customers or the companies that we work with keeps their data safe. But we also take a great deal of responsibility for making sure we're advising companies on what they should be doing, how they should be architecting their environment to make sure that it's as safe as it possibly can be. So, I would say leverage the advice of experts.
Indeed, ma'am. I think there's a lot to learn from you. Ma'am, actually, I have a question again from one of my subscribers. He's asking that, is there any such thing known as private cloud? If it is, ma'am, please explain.
Yeah. Cloud computing, it's a really interesting term. It's actually something that's been around for a lot longer than people realize. Private cloud is basically just, rather than storing your data on your laptop, in the olden days, in the past, laptops, well, there was no such thing as a laptop. You had a desktop, you had a monitor, and you had a big box that sat under your desk and a keyboard. That basically was the data on the computer. So the data and the computing power was stored in one place. Private cloud is basically keeping your data on the internet, but not accessible to anybody else. So it might be, if you're a company, you would have your own server rooms, and you would keep your data there. That's your private cloud, because nobody else, apart from the people that you choose, have access to that. Public cloud is basically leveraging the resources of companies like AWS to store your data in a secure way using the resources of a different company. It doesn't mean it's actually public and everyone has access to it. It means you're leveraging a public resource, a shared resource.
Ma'am, as nowadays people are using cloud services too much. So, ma'am, it's a question to you. Do you believe will cloud service replace the Microsoft desktops?
Look, honestly, you're making me laugh. I think it already has, to be quite honest. And it's not so much about any particular company. It's really not about Microsoft or Google or anyone else. It's actually about the efficiency in the way this works. So to have your data stored on your own laptop is, firstly, not very safe. Not because somebody will hack into your data necessarily, but because if your laptop crashes, I'm sure we all remember the days of the old blue screens. When your laptop crashes, you lose your data. It's gone. It's all gone. And sometimes you can't get it back. So that's not very safe. It's not very satisfying to have worked on a whole lot of documentation and then see that disappear when your computer crashes. So I'd say it's not so much about, what type of companies or who makes the devices. It's more about, how do I make sure that I have access to my data when I need it in a secure way all the time? And if I want to share that data, how do I do that with people who might not be in the same location as me most effectively? And now, if you have a Mac, for example, you share things in iCloud. If you have Google, you share them in Google Drive. If you have, there's lots of different ways of doing this.
Indeed, ma'am. I think the remote access, that's the main issue of this desktop version. Because suppose that if I forgot my desktop somewhere or laptop somewhere, then I could not access. And that is the best thing which we generally get in the cloud computing. Uh, so, ma'am, I have one again question from my subscriber. What does the future holds for career in cloud?
Future careers in cloud, I think, are something that's really important to think about, because cloud, it's not something that's, it's basically the future of computing. Cloud is the future of computing. It is already here. It's not something that's coming, it's already here. It's the way things will continue to work. There's a massive need for many, many jobs in the world of computing, cloud or otherwise. Technology is a huge enabler. And, so jobs that touch data engineers, data scientists, jobs that touch more of the engineering, the sort of infrastructure providers, jobs that touch the analysis of these things, you go move into data scientists, that kind of thing. Jobs that are more creative, that actually use the availability of cloud computing and the fact that you have access to all this data, like the advertising industry, as I mentioned before, the music industry. It's been a really interesting trend during COVID to see musicians who previously had to go to a recording studio to make music, recording these things at home, and sometimes bringing together multiple musicians from different locations to actually create one piece of music. That kind of thing. I think there's going to be an explosion of creative ways to use cloud computing as consumers get more comfortable with it, and companies, particularly in the enterprise space, who are still on this journey, start to really embrace cloud and the possibilities that it enables.
Indeed, ma'am. Again, I have to say that it's a kind of privilege that today we got a chance to hear all these things from you. It really means a lot for all the viewers, those who are watching this session, and for us also, we are learning a lot from you. I don't want to take you much time, so moving to my last question of this session, ma'am. Actually, the question is, ma'am, what do you believe? What are the things the students, those who are in their college days, they must learn in their college only to become future ready for jobs in the tech industry?
Look, it's an interesting thought when you think about what you should study to set yourself up for a career. Because it's, firstly, I would say it's very difficult to make a decision. When you've come straight out of school and you don't have a lot of experience, it's really difficult to decide what you think you'll do for years in the future. Happily now, jobs are much more flexible than they used to be. So, the first thing I would say is don't feel like you have to make a decision, because most jobs, the important thing is to take the learnings that you've got, figure out how to apply your knowledge practically, and then take that forward into each job you go through. So you continue to sort of add more and more content that you actually have access to and can use. So, in terms of what discipline you study, honestly, I don't think it matters, because technology and cloud is so pervasive. It's not separated from any industry. So I don't think it's so much about the sort of function that you choose or the topic, the discipline that you choose. I think what is really important is to experiment, to go home and do some coding, to really try things out, to start a YouTube channel and start, using digital mediums to share and connect, because that then sparks the thought process of what can I do with this? And it's that creativity and that entrepreneurial spirit, which I think is increasingly, for people who are entering the job market, that's actually going to lead to them creating their own business models, their own jobs.
Again, ma'am, it was really a very great advice from your side. And I must say that the kind of energy you brought into this session was very, very inspiring for all of us. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining and giving your important time. It was a healthy discussion with you on the topic. We look forward to conduct more sessions with you in future.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Planet on the ground is where I stand. Never give up, that was always the plan. It's so cold outside, I'm alone, I'm alright. It's so cold outside, I'm alone.